In 1991, a police officer in Milwaukee received a call about a disoriented man wandering the streets. When they found him, he had a handcuff on his wrist. They traced him back to apartment 213. What they found inside that apartment would become one of the most studied cases in the history of forensic psychology. Not because of what Jeffrey Dahmer did, but because of what his brain couldn't do. Jeffrey Dahmer was not born into chaos. He grew up in a quiet suburb of Ohio. His father was a chemist, his mother a teletype machine instructor. By every external measure, he was unremarkable, quiet, withdrawn, intelligent. But from an early age, something was operating differently inside his brain. As a child, Dahmer became fascinated with dead animals, not out of cruelty, at least not initially, out of something closer to curiosity. He would collect roadkill, preserve bones, study the insides of things. Forensic psychologists who later analyzed his case pointed to this early behavior as a critical signal, not of evil, but of a brain that processed the world fundamentally differently from everyone around him. The question neuroscience asks is not, why was Dahmer a monster? The question is, what was happening inside his brain that made connection, empathy, and human attachment virtually impossible? By his teenage years, the signs were escalating. Dahmer began drinking heavily at 14. His parents' marriage was collapsing, and the fantasies, ones he would later describe in chilling detail, had already begun. What's critical to understand is this. Dahmer described his inner world as one of profound loneliness. Not loneliness that sought connection, but loneliness that had given up on the possibility of it entirely. In his own words, during his 1994 interview with Stone Phillips, Dahmer said something that stopped forensic psychologists cold. He said he never felt any guilt. Not suppressed guilt, not denied guilt, simply no guilt. The emotional circuit that produces guilt in human beings, the one that fires when we hurt someone we care about, was operating at near zero. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer committed 17 murders. Each one was followed by the same absence, the same silence where remorse should have been. His brain wasn't broken. It was wired differently from birth, and nobody saw it. So, what was actually happening inside Jeffrey Dahmer's brain? Forensic psychiatrists who evaluated Dahmer diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a paraphilic disorder. But underneath all of that was something more fundamental. The same three neurological differences we explored in our last video, but this time we can see them playing out in real life. 1. The amygdala. Remember, the amygdala is the region that fires when we see fear or pain in someone else. It's what makes most people recoil from causing harm. In psychopaths and individuals with severe antisocial personality disorders, the amygdala is dramatically underactive. In Dahmer's case, multiple psychiatric evaluations noted a complete absence of empathic response. When confronted with the suffering he caused, there was no emotional reaction. Not because he was hiding it, because the hardware wasn't there. 2. The orbital frontal cortex. This is the moral brake of the brain. The region that translates "this is wrong" into "therefore I will not do it." In Dahmer's case, this circuit showed the same disruption we see across severe psychopathic profiles. He could articulate clearly and articulately that what he was doing was wrong. In his interviews, he used the words evil and sick to describe himself. He knew the words, but the circuit that converts moral knowledge into moral behavior, the one that stops the rest of us from acting on dark thoughts, simply wasn't firing. 3. The default mode network. This is perhaps the most revealing finding in Dahmer's psychological profile. The default mode network is the brain system that activates when we think about other people, their feelings, their inner world, their humanity. Dahmer described his victims not as people, but as objects, extensions of his own needs. This isn't a figure of speech. This is what dramatically reduced default mode network connectivity looks like in real life. Other people didn't register as fully human in his neural architecture, not because he chose not to see them that way, but because the brain system that constructs our perception of other people's humanity was barely functioning. Jeffrey Dahmer was executed. No, he was killed by a fellow inmate at Columbia Correctional Institution in 1994. Before his death, he gave a series of interviews that remain some of the most studied documents in forensic psychology. In one of his final interviews, he said something that neuroscientists still reference today. He said he wished he had been caught earlier, not because of remorse for his victims, but because he recognized intellectually that what he was doing was wrong. He knew the words, he just couldn't feel the music. This is the tragedy at the center of cases like Dahmer's. Not that monsters exist among us, but that some of them, from birth, are neurologically incapable of becoming anything else. And our systems, our schools, our families, our medical institutions had no framework to see it coming. The question this channel keeps returning to is the same one Dahmer himself couldn't answer. Where does the brain end and the person begin?